In the late summer of 2017, the Wind River Range in western Wyoming was a masterpiece of raw, unforgiving beauty. It was a landscape of granite spires that clawed at an impossibly blue sky, of alpine meadows carpeted in wildflowers, and of more than 1,000 glacial-fed lakes that held the cold, pristine silence of a world untouched by time. This was the domain of the experienced, the prepared, the truly dedicated outdoors person. It was a place that did not suffer fools gladly, a wilderness that demanded respect and rewarded the cautious with vistas of unparalleled grandeur. It was into this world that Ethan Hayes and Amelia Vance walked, two people who, by all accounts, were the very definition of prepared and respectful. They were not tourists looking for a casual hike. They were seasoned alpinists, a geologist and a botanist whose shared love for the wild places of the earth was second only to their love for each other. They planned a 10-day traverse of the iconic Cirque of the Towers, a journey they had meticulously prepared for over the course of a year. They left their vehicle, a forest green Subaru Outback, at the Big Sandy Trailhead on the morning of August 5th, with plans to return on the 15th. They never did. For 3 years, the Wind River Range held their secret, swallowing them whole and leaving behind nothing but a locked car and a void of unanswered questions. Then, in a remote, uncharted basin nearly 20 miles from their intended route, a lone researcher stumbled upon a scene so bizarre, so utterly incomprehensible, that it would rewrite the definition of survival and challenge the very boundaries of the human mind. She found them, alive, next to a strange, intricate structure of stone and weathered wood, a shrine built in the heart of their isolation. Ethan Hayes, at 32, was a man whose life was written in rock. As a field geologist for a geological survey, his office was the vast, open expanse of the American West. He was quiet, methodical, and possessed a preternatural calm that friends and family attributed to his long hours spent in the silent company of mountains. He could read the story of a landscape in the striations of a cliff face and the composition of a riverbed. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered fitness that comes not from a gym, but from a life lived on the move, under the sun and wind. His expertise was not merely academic. He was a skilled mountaineer, a certified wilderness first responder, and a man who understood the capricious nature of high-altitude environments. He had climbed peaks in the Cascades, navigated the canyons of Utah, and had twice before visited the Wind River Range, a place he considered the geologic soul of the Rocky Mountains. His meticulous nature extended to his trip planning, which was legendary among his circle of friends. His itineraries were detailed down to the gram, with laminated maps, redundant navigation systems, and carefully calculated caloric intakes for each day of an expedition. Amelia Vance, 30, was the vibrant counterpoint to Ethan's stoic calm. She was a botanist specializing in alpine flora, and where Ethan saw the deep history of the earth in stone, Amelia saw the tenacious, delicate story of life in the lichens, mosses, and wildflowers that clung to that same stone. She was effusive, her laughter echoing in the wide-open spaces she loved. Her work often took her to the same remote locations as Ethan's, and it was on a joint research trip in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho that they had met 5 years prior. Their connection was immediate and profound, a bond forged in a shared reverence for the natural world. She was as competent in the backcountry as Ethan, her knowledge of edible and medicinal plants often proving invaluable. She was an artist as well, her detailed sketches of plant life filling dozens of notebooks. These were not just scientific records. They were love letters to the wilderness, capturing the ephemeral beauty of a columbine or the resilient architecture of a bristlecone pine. Together, Ethan and Amelia were a perfectly symbiotic unit, their skills and personalities complementing each other to form a formidable team against the challenges of the wild. Their plan for the August 2017 trip was ambitious but well within their proven capabilities. The Cirque of the Towers Traverse is a classic Wyoming adventure, a high-altitude route that links a series of stunning glacial cirques, demanding off-trail navigation, scrambling over high passes, and a deep understanding of mountain weather. Their intended route would cover approximately 45 miles over 10 days, a pace that allowed for acclimatization and potential weather delays. The official permit, filed with the Pinedale Ranger District, detailed their proposed itinerary with Ethan's characteristic precision. It listed their entry point at Big Sandy, their planned campsites for each night, and their exit via the same trailhead. They had a Garmin InReach satellite messenger, a device that would allow them to send preset "I'm okay" messages or trigger an SOS in a dire emergency. Their gear was top of the line and meticulously maintained. A four-season tent, sleeping bags rated to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, a water purifier, and 10 days of dehydrated food, supplemented by energy bars and nuts. They were prepared for the typical challenges of the winds: afternoon thunderstorms, cold nights, and the physical exertion of travel above 10,000 feet. On the morning of August 5, 2017, they made their last contact with the outside world. At approximately 7:15 a.m., they stopped at a small gas station and convenience store on the outskirts of Pinedale. The clerk, a lifelong resident named Dale, later recalled the couple to investigators. He remembered them because they were so clearly excited and full of life. They bought 2 bottles of water and a bag of trail mix. Dale remembered Ethan studying a large topographic map spread across the hood of their Subaru, while Amelia laughed at something he said. Dale's official testimony noted that they looked like they knew exactly what they were doing an hour later. At 8:32 a.m., Amelia sent a final text message to her mother, Eleanor Vance, in Colorado. It was a simple, reassuring message that would later become a focal point of the investigation. The text read, "At the trailhead. Weather is perfect. Skies are clear. Starting our adventure now. Love you, and we'll see you on the 16th. A single photograph was attached, a selfie of the 2 of them standing in front of the trailhead sign. They were smiling, their faces illuminated by the bright morning sun, the rugged peaks of the southern winds rising behind them like a promise. It was the last image, the last communication anyone would receive from them for 3 years. The 15th of August came and went. For Eleanor Vance, it was a day of quiet anticipation. She expected they might be a day late. It was common for backcountry trips to run over by a day due to weather or simply the desire to savor the final moments of solitude. She didn't worry. On the 16th, when her phone remained silent, a small knot of anxiety began to form. Amelia was diligent, almost religious, about checking in the moment she was back in cell range. By the morning of the 17th, the knot had tightened into a cold, hard dread. Eleanor called Ethan's parents, who had heard nothing. She called the Pinedale Ranger District, who confirmed the couple had not checked out or signed the trail register upon their return. The InReach device, she was told, had never been activated for an SOS, and no preset messages had been received since the day they left. Her initial worry curdled into outright fear. The wilderness that her daughter loved, a place Eleanor had always viewed as a source of joy and renewal, suddenly felt like a malevolent, living entity. At 2:45 p.m. on August 17th, Eleanor Vance, her voice trembling but resolute, officially reported Ethan Hayes and Amelia Vance as missing to the Sublette County Sheriff's Office. The call was taken by a dispatcher who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Missing hikers were a common occurrence in a county that contained over 1 million acres of wilderness, but a couple with this level of experience and preparation who had vanished without a trace was a different matter entirely. The case file, designated SC 17-0817, was assigned to Deputy David Chun, a 15-year veteran of the department. Chun was a quiet, deliberate man who had spent his entire life in the shadow of the mountains. He was the head of the county's Search and Rescue, SAR division, and he knew the Wind River Range intimately, its beauty, its dangers, and its ability to make people disappear. He reviewed their detailed trip plan, their gear list, and the text message to Eleanor. His initial assessment, noted in the case file, was grim, highly experienced subjects. Meticulous plan, no communication, no sosaktivastion. This is not a standard lost hiker scenario. The first official step was to confirm the location of their vehicle. A deputy was dispatched to the Big Sandy trailhead, a remote parking area at the end of a long, washboard dirt road. At 5:12 p.m., the deputy radioed back. The green Subaru Outback was there, parked neatly in a designated spot. The vehicle was locked. Looking through the windows, the deputy could see a pair of clean town shoes on the passenger floor, 2 wallets tucked into the center console, and a travel guide to Wyoming sitting on the back seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no indication of foul play. The car looked exactly as one would expect it to look if its owners had every intention of returning in 10 days to drive it home. The discovery confirmed that Ethan and Amelia had arrived at the trailhead and begun their hike as planned. It also marked the formal starting point of the search. From this spot, they had walked into the wilderness, and the wilderness had not yet given them back. For Deputy Chun, the undisturbed vehicle was the most ominous clue of all. It meant the problem lay somewhere deep inside the vast, complex terrain of the Wind River Range. On the morning of August 18th, one of the largest search and rescue operations in Wyoming's history was mobilized. The Incident Command Post was established at the Big Sandy Opening, a flurry of official activity at the edge of the immense silence. Sublette County's SAR team, a highly skilled group of local volunteers, formed the core of the operation. They were joined by members of Tip Top Search and Rescue, the Teton County SAR, and rangers from the Bridger-Teton National Forest. A Wyoming Air National Guard helicopter was requested, its rotors beating a rhythmic pulse against the thin mountain air as it began aerial reconnaissance. K-9 units, with dogs trained in both live find and cadaver searches, were brought in, their handlers hoping to find a scent trail that could provide a direction of travel. The mood at the command post was one of focused urgency. Every person there understood the unforgiving calculus of wilderness survival. The clock was ticking, and with every passing hour, the window of opportunity for a successful rescue narrowed. The search process was methodical and exhaustive. Deputy Chun, acting as incident commander, divided the search area into a grid based on the couple's detailed itinerary. Teams were assigned to hike their planned route, meticulously checking every campsite, every pass, and every potential off-trail deviation. The helicopter focused on aerial observation, its crew scanning the vast expanses of granite and forest for any sign of color that didn't belong, a piece of a tent, a brightly colored jacket, anything that would stand out against the natural landscape. The primary challenge was the terrain itself. The Wind River Range is a vertical world of immense scale. The dense canopy of lodgepole pine and spruce forests made aerial searches difficult, obscuring the ground from above. The endless fields of granite boulders and talus slopes that flanked the high passes were a nightmare for ground searchers. They held no tracks, and a simple slip could send a person into a deep crevice hidden from view. The sheer vastness of a search area was daunting. Even with a precise itinerary, a small navigational error or an unplanned detour could put the couple miles away in any direction, expanding the search radius exponentially with each passing day. By the end of the first week, the search had yielded only a few puzzling, ultimately inconclusive clues. The K-9 units managed to pick up a scent trail leading from the Subaru. The dogs followed it with confidence for the first 3 miles along the main trail toward Big Sandy Lake, confirming the couple's initial direction. But at a large, flat granite slab where the trail crossed a meadow, the scent abruptly vanished. The handlers worked the dogs in expanding circles for hours, but they could not reacquire the trail. It was as if Ethan and Amelia had simply ceased to exist at that spot. On the 4th day of the search, a helicopter crew spotted a flash of color in a talus field high on the shoulder of Warbonnet Peak, slightly off their intended route. A ground team was dispatched, a grueling 8-hour ascent, only to find a discarded Mylar balloon, its celebratory message a cruel joke in the somber context of the search. The most perplexing discovery came on day 6. A search team found a single, high-end trekking pole, later identified as belonging to Ethan, leaning neatly against a massive boulder. It was found nearly 2 miles north of their planned path, in a drainage they had no logical reason to enter. The pole was not broken or dropped. It appeared to have been deliberately placed. There were no other signs in the area, No tracks, no campsite, no discarded gear. The discovery raised more questions than answers and added a layer of profound strangeness to the already baffling case. On August 28th, after 10 days of intensive searching, Deputy Chan made the difficult but necessary decision to officially scale back the active operation. Over 15,000 man-hours had been invested. Helicopters had logged more than 100 hours of flight time. Every section of the primary search grid had been covered multiple times by ground teams and K-9 units. The search had been one of the most comprehensive in the state's history, yet it had yielded nothing of substance. The first snow of the season was forecast for the high country, a development that would make further ground searches exceptionally dangerous and erase any potential tracks that might have survived. At a somber press conference held at the Sublette County Courthouse, Chen announced that the search would be moving to a limited, continuous mode, meaning that while the large-scale daily operations would cease, patrols would continue to monitor the area and any new evidence would be investigated. He spoke with a heavy heart, his professional language barely masking his personal frustration. He looked directly into the cameras and stated, "We have not given up on finding Ethan and Amelia. We have simply run out of places to look for Eleanor Vance, who had spent every day at the incident command post. The announcement was a devastating blow, the official closing of a door she was determined to keep open." Weeks turned into months. The vibrant greens and wildflower palettes of the Wind Rivers gave way to the stark gold of autumn aspens, and then to the deep, silencing white of winter. The case of the missing couple faded from the headlines, replaced by the churn of the daily news cycle. But for Eleanor Vance, time did not move on. It simply accumulated, each day a new layer of grief and uncertainty. She refused to let her daughter and Ethan be forgotten. She liquidated a portion of her retirement savings to hire private investigators and independent mountain rescue specialists. They reviewed the case files, re-interviewed the gas station clerk, and conducted their own smaller-scale searches when the snows melted the following summer. But they found nothing new. Eleanor became a reluctant expert in social media, running a Facebook page titled Find Ethan and Amelia, which she updated daily with photos, memories, and pleas for information. The page became a gathering place for a community of strangers who were touched by the story, offering words of support and sharing the digital flyers across the country. She drove to Wyoming every few months, walking the first few miles of the Big Sandy Trail, staring into the impassive wilderness that held her daughter captive, a ritual of hope and despair. As the first year bled into the second, and the second into the third, public perception of the case began to shift in unsettling ways. The initial wave of sympathy and community support was slowly eroded by the tide of online speculation and amateur sleuthing. With no evidence of an accident or foul play, wild theories began to percolate in internet forums and true crime communities. Some posited that the couple, both highly intelligent and resourceful, had staged their disappearance to escape debts or start a new life off the grid. Others concocted darker narratives, suggesting a murder-suicide pact, with one of them having disposed of the other before vanishing into the wilderness. One particularly persistent and painful rumor, based on no evidence whatsoever, suggested a secret falling out between the two, perhaps an affair that came to a head on the trail. These theories, born of a need to fill the vacuum of information with a coherent story, were a source of immense pain for the families. They forced Eleanor and Ethan's parents to not only grieve their missing children, but also to defend their character against the faceless accusations of strangers. The official investigation remained open but inactive. The case file, now several binders thick, sat on the corner of David Chen's desk, who had since been promoted to sheriff. It was a constant, silent reminder of the only major case in his career that remained unsolved, a testament to the fact that sometimes, even with all the resources and expertise in the world, the wilderness simply does not give up its secrets. In the early summer of 2020, 3 years after the disappearance, Dr. Eris Thorne, a postdoctoral glaciology researcher from a university in Colorado, was preparing for a field season in the Wind River Range. Her research was focused on the recession rates of the smaller, uncatalogued glaciers that were scattered throughout the range's most remote basins. These are places far from any established trails, areas that saw human foot traffic perhaps once a decade, if at all. Her work required a combination of high-resolution satellite imagery analysis and on-the-ground verification. One particular area of interest was a high, unnamed cirque in the northern part of the range, a place she had identified from satellite data as containing a significant, rapidly melting body of ice. It was located nearly 20 aerial miles from the Cirque of the Towers and was separated from it by a labyrinth of impassable ridges and deep canyons. Accessing it required a multi-day trek through dense, trackless forest and up treacherous scree slopes. It was the kind of place you only went to if you had a very specific, compelling reason. On the 5th day of her expedition, after a grueling ascent into the basin, Eris Thorne saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. She raised her binoculars, her brow furrowed in confusion. Perched on a small, flat moraine overlooking the glacier was a structure. It was not a natural formation. It was clearly man-made, a complex and intricate construction of stacked stones and weathered, sun-bleached wood. It was roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, with low stone walls that spiraled inward toward a central point. It looked ancient, like the ruin of some forgotten civilization. As she scanned the structure with her binoculars, she saw movement. 2 figures. They were emaciated, their bodies' skeletal frames draped in tattered, patched clothing. Their hair was long and matted, their skin baked to a dark leather by 3 years of high-altitude sun. They were moving slowly, methodically, lifting flat stones and placing them onto the spiraling walls of the structure. They moved with a strange, ritualistic grace, seemingly oblivious to her presence. Eris felt a chill crawl up her spine that had nothing to do with the cold glacial wind. Slowly, cautiously, Eris made her way closer, using a line of boulders for cover. She got within 100 yards, close enough to see the details of the scene. The structure was a kind of labyrinth, its stone walls meticulously built. In the very center, arranged with deliberate care, was a collection of objects: 2 faded, weather-beaten backpacks, a pair of ice axes with their tips driven into the ground, a small camp stove, and several notebooks, their pages swollen and warped by moisture. It was a display, an altar. The 2 figures continued their work, their movements synchronized and trance-like. She could see their faces now. They were gaunt and hollow-cheeked, but the features were unmistakable. Eris had followed the story of the missing couple from her home in Colorado. She had seen the posters, the news reports, the haunting smiles, and the selfie from the trailhead. It was them. It was Ethan Hayes and Amelia Vance. Taking a deep breath, Eris stepped out from behind the boulder. "Hello," she called out, her voice thin in the vast emptiness. The figures froze. They turned their heads slowly, their movements stiff and unnatural. They looked at her not with surprise or alarm, but with a profound, unsettling vacancy. Their eyes were empty, devoid of recognition or emotion. They just stared. Realizing the profound fragility of the situation, Eris backed away slowly, her heart pounding. She retreated until she was out of sight, then scrambled down the slope until she felt safe enough to use her satellite phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed the emergency number for the Sublette County Sheriff. The call from Eris Thorne reached the sheriff's office dispatch at 3:42 p.m. on July 22, 2020. The dispatcher, initially skeptical of the garbled, breathless report from a researcher in a remote, unnamed basin, quickly grasped the potential significance. The call was patched through directly to Sheriff David Chun. Chun listened in stunned silence as Dr. Thorne described the stone structure, the arranged gear, and the 2 emaciated figures she identified as Ethan and Amelia. For a long moment after the call ended, Chun simply sat at his desk, the old case file open before him. Disbelief warred with a surge of adrenaline. After 3 years of dead ends and false hopes, this was it. The breakthrough. His mind raced, processing the implications. They were alive, but the description of their state and the bizarre shrine suggested this was not a simple rescue. This was something far more complex. He immediately initiated a high-priority response, but with a caution that surprised his deputies. He ordered a media blackout and mobilized a small, specialized team. A single helicopter, 2 of his most experienced SAR deputies, and a paramedic trained in critical care and psychological first aid. He knew that a full-scale, chaotic response could be disastrous. Based on Dr. Thorne's description, Ethan and Amelia were not just physically frail, they were psychologically shattered. The extraction would have to be handled with the delicacy of a bomb disposal. The news of their discovery reignited the cold case with the force of a flash fire. But for now, it was a secret held by a handful of people, a fragile truth suspended in the thin mountain air. The discovery of Ethan and Amelia immediately reclassified the case. It was no longer a missing persons investigation, but a complex medical and psychological crisis. The primary objective shifted from search to a delicate and precarious recovery. Sheriff Chen briefed his small team, emphasizing that the subjects were to be considered critically ill patients, not just lost hikers. The paramedic, a man named Marcus Cole, prepared kits with high-energy nutrition for fluids and warming blankets, but also included mild sedatives, anticipating potential agitation or resistance. The operation was launched at dawn the next day. The helicopter lifted off from Pinedale, carrying the team and Dr. Thorne, who had agreed to guide them to the precise location. As they flew over the jagged peaks, the sheer remoteness of the site became terrifyingly apparent. It was a fortress of rock and ice, a place that seemed to exist outside the known world. The pilot located a small, barely stable landing zone on a rocky outcrop about a half-mile from the basin. From there, the team would have to proceed on foot. The scene that greeted Sheriff Chen and his team was exactly as Dr. Thorne had described, and yet far more unsettling in person. The stone shrine dominated the small moraine, a work of obsessive, painstaking labor. It felt sacred and deeply disturbing at the same time. Ethan and Amelia were there, moving stones. They looked up as the team approached, their faces impassive. They were shockingly thin, their bones sharp beneath their sun-darkened skin. Their clothing was a patchwork of their original technical gear, crudely stitched together with what looked like sinew and pieces of animal hide. Sheriff Chen approached them slowly, his hands open and visible. "Ethan? Amelia," he said, his voice soft. "My name is David Chen. We're here to help you." They did not respond. They simply watched him, their eyes holding a distant, otherworldly focus, as if looking through him at something far away. It was Marcus, the paramedic, who made the first connection. He noticed Amelia's gaze fixed on a small, vibrant purple flower growing between the rocks. He knelt down, pointed to it, and said its scientific name, Polemonium viscosum, the sky pilot. Amelia's eyes flickered with a faint glimmer of recognition. She whispered a single, raspy word, "Alpine." It was the first word she had spoken to another human being in 3 years, and it was the key that began to unlock the door to their shattered world. Getting them to leave the shrine was a slow, painstaking process that took several hours. They were not hostile, but they were deeply resistant, exhibiting a profound attachment to the location and the structure they had built. They seemed to operate under a shared, unspoken set of rules. When the paramedic tried to offer Ethan a high-protein food bar, he refused it, instead walking to the shrine and touching a specific sequence of stones before returning and accepting the food. They communicated with each other through a series of subtle gestures and half-muttered phrases that were unintelligible to the rescuers. It became clear that they believed their safety and survival were intrinsically linked to the shrine and the rituals they performed there. To leave it was, in their minds, to court disaster. Sheriff Chen, showing incredible patience, did not force them. He and his team simply sat with them, speaking in calm, reassuring tones, slowly reintroducing them to the world they had left behind. They talked about the weather, about the town of Pinedale, about Eleanor. It was the mention of her mother's name that finally broke through Amelia's trance. Tears began to stream down her face, cutting clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. Slowly, with the team's gentle support, they allowed themselves to be led away from their strange sanctuary, casting long, lingering looks back at the spiral of stones until the helicopter landing zone came into view. Their physical condition was dire. In the hospital in Jackson, doctors determined they were suffering from severe chronic malnutrition, advanced vitamin deficiencies, and the long-term effects of exposure. Ethan's right leg had been badly broken at some point. The tibia and fibula had fused together at a crooked angle, a painful, self-healed injury that left him with a permanent, pronounced limp. He also showed signs of a past traumatic brain injury, with neurological responses that were sluggish and uneven. Amelia was afflicted with severe frostbite scars on her hands and feet, evidence of a brutal winter spent with inadequate protection. But their physical ailments were secondary to their profound psychological trauma. They were diagnosed with a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder and, most remarkably, a shared psychotic disorder, or folie à deux. Their minds had retreated from an unbearable reality, constructing a shared delusional world to cope with their isolation and suffering. This world was governed by the perceived entity of the mountain and the rituals of the shrine, a psychological fortress they had built together to survive. The long road to recovery would be less about healing their bodies and more about carefully dismantling this fortress and coaxing their minds back to the shared reality they had been torn from 3 years earlier. The story of what had happened to them emerged not in a single, coherent narrative, but in a mosaic of fragmented memories, pieced together over months of therapy with specialists and long, quiet conversations with Sheriff Chun and Eleanor. Their harrowing testimony, delivered in whispers and disjointed sentences, painted a picture of a routine trip that had descended into a nightmare. On the third day of their hike, as they were crossing a high, exposed pass near the Cirque of the Towers, a freak summer blizzard had descended upon them with terrifying speed and ferocity. It was a whiteout, a blinding chaos of wind and snow that was not in any forecast. Disoriented, they had strayed from the route. Ethan, leading the way, had stepped onto a cornice of snow that collapsed beneath him. He fell nearly 40 feet down a steep, rocky chute. Amelia found him unconscious, with a severe head wound and a compound fracture of his lower leg, the bone protruding from the skin. The fall had also sent his backpack, containing their satellite messenger and much of their gear, tumbling into a deep, inaccessible crevice. Amelia's actions in the hours and days that followed were a testament to her incredible strength and resourcefulness. With Ethan drifting in and out of consciousness and the blizzard raging, she managed to fashion a makeshift splint for his leg using their remaining trekking pole and strips of their tense rainfly. She half-dragged, half-carried him to a shallow rock overhang, a meager shelter against the storm's fury. The blizzard lasted for 3 days. They huddled together for warmth, their food supply dwindling, the temperature plummeting far below freezing. When the storm finally broke, they were in a world transformed. They were hopelessly lost in an unfamiliar basin, with Ethan gravely injured and their most critical survival gear gone. His head injury had left him confused and delirious, his memory fractured. The meticulous, calm geologist was gone, replaced by a man who was frightened, paranoid, and often unable to recognize Amelia. The burden of their survival fell entirely on her shoulders. They spent the first brutal winter in that rock shelter. Amelia, drawing on her deep botanical knowledge and a primal will to live, kept them alive. She snared marmots and pikas with cord she salvaged from their gear. She learned the patterns of the ptarmigan. She foraged for edible roots and pine nuts. She used the remaining tent fabric to create insulated wraps for their feet. She nursed Ethan, cleaning his wound as best she could, fighting off the infection that constantly threatened to take hold. His leg healed, but it healed badly, leaving him permanently disabled. His mind, however, did not. The trauma of the fall and the subsequent isolation had fundamentally altered him. He became convinced that the mountain was a sentient being, an entity that had intentionally trapped them. He believed it was watching them, judging them. Amelia, alone and bearing an unimaginable psychological burden, slowly began to be drawn into his delusional framework. It was a shared world that, while terrifying, offered a kind of explanation for their predicament. It gave a name and a face to the random cruelty of nature. As the first year passed into the second, their shared psychosis deepened and became more structured. The mountain was no longer just a captor. It became a deity of sorts, one that demanded appeasement. They began to build the shrine. It started simply, with a small pile of stones to mark the day they had survived the fall. But it grew into an obsessive, all-consuming project. Each stone they placed was a prayer, a ritual, a day survived. The spiral labyrinth was a map of their ordeal, a physical record of their time in isolation. Arranging their broken gear in the center was an act of sacrifice, an offering to the mountain spirit they believed held their lives in its hands. Their entire existence became governed by the logic of this shared delusion. They developed complex rituals for foraging, for eating, for sleeping, all designed to placate the mountain and ensure their continued survival. They were no longer Ethan and Amelia, the scientists. They were two acolytes in a lonely church of granite and ice, their minds reshaped by trauma into a form that could withstand the unbearable. They survived not just on snared animals and foraged roots, but on the strange, powerful sustenance of their shared madness. The official investigation corroborated every verifiable detail of their fragmented story. A team led by Sheriff Chen flew back to the basin and, with guidance from the slowly recovering Amelia, located the original rock shelter where they had spent the first winter. It was a grim sight, containing the tattered remains of their tent and a small, heartbreaking pile of personal effects. Following the direction of the pass, they were able to locate the chute where Ethan had fallen. A skilled climbing team rappelled into the crevice below. There, wedged deep beneath years of accumulated snow and rockfall, was Ethan's backpack. Inside, its electronics ruined by moisture, was the Garmin InReach device. Its battery was dead, but its presence confirmed the critical detail of their story. The accident had robbed them of their only lifeline to the outside world. Forensic analysis of the main campsite at the shrine revealed a scene of long-term, primitive survival. They found caches of dried meat, piles of animal bones, and tools crudely fashioned from stone and wood. The evidence was clear and overwhelming. There had been no foul play, no third party. It was a story of a catastrophic accident compounded by some of the most extreme environmental and psychological pressures imaginable. The long-term aftermath for Ethan and Amelia was a quiet, arduous journey of healing. Physically, they recovered much of their strength, though Ethan's limp remained a permanent reminder of the fall. The psychological recovery was a far more delicate and protracted process. They were slowly, carefully reintroduced to the modern world, a world that now seemed deafeningly loud, blindingly fast, and overwhelmingly complex. For months, they struggled with severe anxiety, agoraphobia, and the lingering echoes of their shared delusion. They were treated at a specialized trauma facility in Colorado, where therapists worked with them both individually and as a couple, helping them to untangle the real memories from the delusional framework they had built around them. Eleanor Vance was a constant, steady presence throughout their recovery, her unwavering love providing an anchor to the world they were fighting to rejoin. She read to them, brought them photographs from their past, and patiently helped them rebuild the identities that the wilderness had stripped away. The story of Ethan and Amelia became a legend in the search and rescue community and a subject of intense study among psychologists specializing in survival and trauma. Their case was a rare and extreme example of folie à deux developing as a coping mechanism in a situation of prolonged, severe stress. It led to new training modules for SAR teams on how to handle subjects with profound psychological trauma and raised awareness about the complex mental health challenges that can follow a successful rescue. The shrine they built, initially viewed as a symptom of madness, was reevaluated by experts as a remarkable and creative act of psychological survival. a way to impose order, meaning, and ritual onto a chaotic and meaningless existence. It was a testament to the human mind's desperate, and sometimes bizarre, attempts to endure the unendurable. 2 years after their rescue, Ethan and Amelia, now living a quiet life in a small town far from any mountains, gave a single, lengthy interview to a journalist who had followed their story with sensitivity and respect. They spoke with a quiet dignity, their voices still bearing the fragile echo of their ordeal. They described their life in the basin not as a period of madness, but as a different kind of existence, with its own logic and its own truths. Amelia spoke of the strange beauty she found there, the way her senses had become attuned to the slightest shifts in the wind or the subtlest changes in the light. Ethan, his memory still riddled with gaps, talked about the shrine as a duty, a job that gave him purpose when all else was lost. They expressed no desire to return to the wilderness. Their love for the mountains had been replaced by a deep and abiding respect for its power, a power they had experienced in its most raw and elemental form. They had gone into the Wind Rivers as two confident, experienced mountaineers and had emerged as two entirely different people, forever bonded by a shared trauma and a secret world that only they could ever truly understand. The legacy of their story is not one of tragedy, but one of profound and unsettling resilience. It serves as a stark reminder of the thin veneer of civilization that separates us from the primal forces of nature and the deep, uncharted wilderness within our own minds. The undisturbed Subaru at the trailhead, the single, deliberately placed trekking pole, the scent trail that vanished on bare rock. These were the opening sentences of a story far stranger than any investigator could have imagined. Ethan and Amelia survived because they adapted, not just physically, but psychologically. They created a new reality, a new religion for a congregation of two, because the old reality was simply too horrific to bear. The shrine of stones and weathered gear, left to be slowly reclaimed by the harsh alpine environment, stands as a silent monument. It is a testament not to a god or a spirit of the mountain, but to the desperate, unbreakable, and sometimes terrifyingly strange capacity of the human will to endure, a story written in stone in a place where all other words had lost their meaning.